Hello and welcome. Today we have a quick chess victory with the Jabava London chess opening. So White is being played by Alireza Firouzja, who at one time I believe was the second highest rated player in the world after Magnus Carlsen. But since then his rating has dropped some, but he's young and improving. So let's take a look at this game. Now when I put the game review in, for some reason their names disappear, but it's Alireza Firouzja with the white pieces at a 33-13 rating versus Denis Lazavik with 31-34. So, high level players. Let's see what they do here. Now, if I run this game review, see their names disappeared for some reason. White played at an 89.6% accuracy rating versus 72.9% by his opponent. And you can see here how the game was pretty even. Black kind of had a lead for a little bit until the end and then the win. So the players played under my picture, you can't see here. White played at a 3,300 level versus 2,850 by his opponent. And this is a 1-minute blitz game. So things might not be perfect when they're playing that fast. Black did end up having a blunder, and then you see a few inaccuracies and mistakes. So let's take a look at this and see what these top-level players do in a 1-minute blitz game. So I'll put up the analysis so we can look at that as well. So it looks like a wild game. Begins with D4, knight to F6, and then knight to C3, signaling that White may want to play the Jabava London, which is D4, knight to C3, and bishop to F4. So the game continues with D5 being played to prevent White placing both pawns in the center here. Now, of course, if White does that, there would be a capture. And so bishop to F4, the Jabava London. Now, let's see how a top player would try and stop the progress of the Jabava London. There's always a threat of knight to B5 with this bishop and the knight piling up on the C7 pawn. So here, A6 is played immediately to stop that, any future attempts at pushing that knight up here and causing trouble. So the game continues with F3 being played. Now, apparently the computer says this is a mistake and does not like this move. And normally E3 would be played first because then that gives you the option of placing this knight on F3. But the F3 move is a theme in the Jabava London, especially if this bishop pushes here. Then sometimes F3 can be played with a follow-up of G4, chasing the bishop, gaining space on the king side. So the computer wants E3 immediately, and that's usually what's played to fortify this pawn and to let this bishop develop. So the game continues with C5, another common move in the Jabava London, taking this C pawn and putting pressure on the important D pawn, which is kind of the anchor in the center of the Jabava London position here. So now E3, according to the computer, is the best move, and that, of course, is what is played by Alireza Firouzja with White here. So now the computer would like to see C captures D4, but instead knight to C6 is played, just adding a little more pressure to the center and developing. Computer says that's an inaccuracy. Maybe E6 would be preferred to help fortify the center here. So continuing on, we have queen up to D2, perhaps signaling castling long here for White, and the game continues with E6. Now the bishop is free to develop, maybe to confront this bishop on f4 and castle kingside. And so the game continues with g4. One of the reasons the f3 move was played is to allow the push of the g pawn, gaining space on the king side, especially if black castle's there. The h pawn and g pawn will be able to march forward with a pawn storm, and perhaps the pieces will flow in behind those pawns for an attack. So bishop to d6 is played, a confrontation between the two bishops. The computer doesn't like this, though, saying it's a mistake, and that better would have been an immediate b5 pawn thrust, trying to gain space on the queen side, perhaps allowing this bishop to develop here on the long diagonal, aiming down through the middle and towards white's king side. But in the game, the bishops are basically challenging each other. So what will white do here? We have capture of the c pawn, which makes sense because you capture this pawn, and now the bishop that has already moved would have to move again. But the computer says that's a missed opportunity, that it would have been better to just exchange the bishops in the middle. So with this move, the computer apparently claims that black is ahead by the equivalent of a pawn. So let's see what happens. The bishop just captures, and apparently that's best to keep the material even. And even though material's even, 1 point advantage here for black. So how does it continue? Castling long, white tries to get more control of this half-open file with a rook-queen battery, and the game continues with bishop to d7. So instead of pushing the b pawn and developing to b7, we have this d7 move. The computer says that's a mistake. Queen to a5 would have been better. That way, if this knight has to move at any point, the queens could be traded, but also there would be maybe an attack on this a pawn. So instead, we have bishop to d7. White responds with the thrust of the h pawn here, so gaining more space. In case black castles kingside, the attack is already underway. So here the queen to a5 move is played a little late. Now the computer says that a thrust in the center would be better, which that is a common rule of thumb. If your opponent is attacking on a wing, on the edges of the board, then it is often wise to counterattack in the center. So since white is thrusting forward here on the king side, a pawn push to e5 may be wise. So now we have king over to b1 to guard this pawn in case the knight has to move. So the game continues with rook to c8. So this looks like a good move, placing your rook on the half-open file. The computer says this is a mistake, though, that it would be better. And also, white has gone ahead. Now white has a slight edge. Apparently, e5 would be better, forcing this bishop to retreat back probably, or perhaps move here and go after the knight. So the game continues with knight to e2. So just finally developing this kingside piece, because so far white has done nothing with his kingside pieces, and black is almost completely developed. So moving on, we have kingside castling finally. But this may invite an attack, as these pawns are already positioned here to move forward. So we have the h-pawn moving forward first, perhaps planning to just keep on going here. So what does black do? Black ignores that ignores the attack on the edge and counterattacks in the center, as we have said before that is usually a wise option. So now the bishop does attack the knight instead of retreating back, and we continue with another thrust in the center, d4, but apparently that is a mistake, that it would be better to develop the bishop more towards the center here, perhaps freeing the d8 square for the rook to help with this pawn thrust and to line up on the queen. So the game continues with capture, a great move, and now recapture. So the knight is under attack. What should Firouzja do here now? Let's see. Well, the computer is recommending bishop takes on f6. Let's see what actually occurred in the game. We do have bishop captures on f6, pawn captures, and this is a blunder. So perhaps with the very quick bullet chess time control, mistakes will be made. The queen is under attack, but the queen could move up here and just pick off this bishop. So that is not played. Instead, an immediate attempt at a mate. So right now, we have a possible mate in one. So g6 to block this attack. But now a continuation with queen to h6, and this is unstoppable. So right now, it looks like after this move, we have a mate in 4. So, how would you slow this down? Perhaps you would have to give up some material, maybe attack with this pawn. So it looks like that is the only way to go here, is to sacrifice the queen, but it just delays the inevitable. The threat is, of course, queen to g7 here with a mate. And the only way to prevent a mate in 1 would be this, just to give up the queen. The king could take that. The king does not want to go to c1, or that would be a mate. So capture, then bishop to e6 check. But then you have a block. Now, let's see. Bishop captures, or the knight, but it just delays the win here after this move. So, either move, knight check or bishop captures the pawn with check. It looks like the king could just retreat, and then we would have this mate here. All right, well, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments with any requests, suggestions, whatever you would like to say. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.